What's up guys, I have a huge pile of hardware here in front of me yet again, so you know what that means? It's time to build a PC. This time I'm trying to build something that matches up nicely with the brand new RTX 3080 graphics card from NVIDIA. We're featuring the Zotac Trinity version of that today.
Excellent!
Team Group's Dark Z series of DDR4 gaming memory features an aggressive yet stylish armored design with high-performance aluminum alloy heatsinks to keep thermals in check. The Dark Z series uses specially selected high-quality modules to achieve DDR4 speeds up to 3600 with XMP 2.0 support for easy setup, and kits are available in capacities of up to 32 GB per DIMM, perfect for a gaming PC or a high-end workstation. Click the sponsor link in the description for more.
Also over here on my left, your right, we have a bunch of Corsair products, and this is definitely a very Corsair heavy build, but I wanted to feature their new 4000 series case. It's available in a few different varieties, but the 4000D Airflow here is a very promising case. It only costs $80, and if you want a full review on that case, or at least the 4000X version, I highly recommend Dimitri's video over on Hardware Connects, which he just posted within the past week, and I'll link that in the video's description. Beyond that, we're also of course featuring the RTX 3080, and I wanted to quickly point out these are very difficult to get a hold of right now, and I completely sympathize with a lot of you who are very frustrated trying to buy one at launch. There's another great video out there I want to recommend. It's from Gamers Nexus, talking about pricing and availability of the RTX 3080s, bots that have been buying up available stock and relisting them for extremely exorbitant prices. All that stuff really sucks for anyone who is really hoping to buy one of these cards right at launch, but we're told that more inventory should be coming in. These should be becoming more and more available as September progresses, and especially as we get into October. That said, I am certainly going to be keeping my eye on the availability of these cards as well as the pricing that you're able to purchase them at, because if the fact is that for the remainder of 2020 you can only buy them at prices that are marked up $100 or $200 or $400, well then it just becomes a much less competitive product. For today, I am maintaining optimism that these will be in stock at the prices listed. The Zotac Trinity here is listed at $720 for the OC version and $700 for the non-OC version, so I'll post a link at least to the manufacturer product page for this card in the description. And then there's one last thing to point out before I go over all these parts. One is that when I talked to Corsair about this build, they were like, hey, let's send you a bunch of stuff to throw in there. And I was like, sure, why not? Let's embrace the Corsair and the RGB, and hopefully all that stuff will tie together. That's why we have some Corsair fancy RGB fans and this iCue H115i Elite Capellix new all-in-one liquid cooler. But there is a more reasonably priced version of this build than what I'm assembling today that will cost you around $1,500. I'll post a link to that build in the description, as well as everything I'm building with today. And that build does maintain the core functional components of this build, including the case, a CPU in the 3700X rather than the 3950X I'm using today, and of course the same graphics card and motherboard even. So check the description for links to all that stuff. I'm gonna go over the rest of the parts for this build. All right, let's just start from the left and work our way over to the right, starting of course with the graphics card, the Zotac Gaming RTX 3080. Very powerful card. It's done very well in the reviews. The only real negatives about it are going to be that people can't actually buy it right now, and people are frustrated about that. And the 3080s are more power hungry than even like an RTX 2080 Ti, for example. That's why we're going with a more powerful power supply. We have an 850 watt unit over there. But our Zotac Trinity card features an extended warranty, 10 gigs of GDDR6 memory. It's got the Ice Storm cooler on there, which is a 3-fan design. It is essentially a triple slot card, and it has lots of fancy RGB. Since I am sort of embracing the RGB with this build, there's lots of that going on, I thought why not go with the card that I had unboxed of the 3080s so far, and you can check out that video where I unboxed a couple of the other ones too, that has the most RGB. That seems to make sense to me. Apart from the GPU, the CPU is going to be the other most important part of the computer. It's your call as to which of those is more important to you. And I would recommend a 3700X to pair with an RTX 3080 right now if you're trying to buy something that saves a little bit of money. You can get that for less than $300. It's an 8-core, 16-thread processor. That one is still based on 7 nanometer and everything, and it's just a good bang for the buck. And you can also use the stock cooler for that to sort of get you off the ground and running. That said, I'm planning to do some testing in this setup, and I want the testing to be comparable to the tests that I've already run with the RTX 3080, so I'm sticking with the 3950X, the fastest CPU that you can currently get for this platform, which is a 16-core, 32-thread beast. And this one will also hit higher peak frequencies than even like a 3900X or 3900XT. As a result, however, that makes the build, as I'm putting it together, much more expensive. So if you're looking at the $1,500 price, that does not include the 3950X. 3950X also does not include a cooler in the box because they're assuming you're going to pair it with something a little bit more beastly. And for that purpose today, I have the new Corsair iCue H115i Elite Capellix. It uses their new like super low power draw and low heat generating Capellix LEDs in the pump block combo unit right there. Compatible, of course, with Corsair's iCue software for controlling all the RGB and stuff like that. And it's also my first look, I'd say in person, of Corsair's new yellow. What do you guys think of that? There's the old yellow and the new yellow. This kind of reminds me of some inline skates that I used to have way back in the day, but I might be dating myself there. To tie everything together inside the case, we have the MSI Mag B550 Tomahawk motherboard, and you could make an argument for going with an X570 variant if you wanted a little bit more PCI Express 4.0 connectivity on the motherboard. But B550 will give you PCI Express Gen 4 for your graphics card. It also gives you an extra 4 lanes directly for an expansion NVMe SSD. We're not using a Gen 4 SSD today, but that does leave that as an upgrade path option if you wanted to drop one in. This board is really well reviewed so far. It's got a great power delivery setup, and it's got the USB 3.2 Gen 2 front panel connector that we're going to need in order to plug in the front panel USB-C port on our case. For a power supply, you should go with a 750 watt unit. That's what's recommended for the RTX 3080. I have an RM850 here, which is an 850 watt 80 plus gold unit from Corsair. In the description for the $1,500 version of this build, I'm going to link a 750 watt unit, hopefully still at least 80 plus bronze rated and modular with all black cables. Those are some of the features that this power supply certainly has, but this one is a little bit more expensive. That said, it's a really nice unit, and at 850 watts, it provides a little bit of extra headroom if you want to add more hardware to your build. And incidentally, this is the power supply that I used for all of my introduction RTX 3080 benchmark tests. We'll go over the case a little bit more once I get it out of the box, but this is the 4000D airflow, and this will cost you $80. There's a 4000X that comes with more RGB fans integrated, as well as a controller unit for those. That's $120, so it's a $40 premium over this. Funny thing is, I have a couple of these QL120 RGB fan setups here. These actually, if you add this to the cost of this, it becomes less cost effective than just buying the 4000X straight up. But again, for anyone who's trying to stick to a budget and doesn't care about the RGB, you can not use those fans and you can get the case for $80. So I guess that's the point I'm trying to make here. But I do have supplemental RGB fans that will be dropped in there to increase the RGB goodness. Here's our memory kit. This is Corsair Dominator Platinum, which is their premium series of memory. And this wasn't specifically a kit that I requested because I would have gone for a 3600 speed kit for this setup. That said, 32 gigs is nice, and it's definitely nice to bump up over 16 gigs if you can afford it. These are going to look really pretty for the build, and you can buy this same kit pretty much in 3600 speed if you so desire. That said, I think when I get to benchmark testing, I'm probably going to swap this out for a 3600 speed kit, or who knows, maybe Corsair will send one of those kits down so I can swap it in and be more honest with what I'm building today. But I guess the main point is, again, here we're trying to tie in all this RGB stuff, and the Dominator Platinums do have a pretty good implementation of that. Rounding things out with my Corsair hardware, we have a Lexar drive. I think if you can afford it right now, you should be dropping in a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD into your build. It doesn't necessarily need to be a PCI Express Gen 4 drive, and you can get 1 terabyte drives if you're going for standard SATA for like $80 right now. If you go up towards $90 to $100, you can get an NVMe drive like this. It's going to give you a really nice boost in transfer speeds over a standard SATA drive, and so I think the kind of bang for the buck for these in-between drives is really nice. This is a Lexar NM610, which I'll link in the description. Of course, Corsair also makes high-speed NVMe SSDs, and they didn't send me one of those though, so I can't use it in the build, so we're going with this Lexar unit, which is a good bang for the buck. All right, so first look at this case, and Dimitri mentioned that it reminded him of their Obsidian series and sort of some of the roots that Corsair started off with when they first started making cases, which was, gosh, like over 10 years ago now, I think. I think first impressions for me are that it's a pretty clean design overall. I mean, it's a tower style case, so sort of the boxiness, they haven't tried to round off the edges or too much like that. And again, talking about that Corsair yellow, they've started to add some accents for that. Pretty subtle, but just a little tag here on the dust filter, so aids you in pulling that off, and also I guess stands out as sort of a branding thing. The yellow is also on the USB port, and an accent on the thumb screws. These are captive thumb screws that are holding on the side panel. I think lately I've been appreciating the tempered glass side panels that don't just have holes drilled through them that you attach to. This one actually has some nubs here that stick into some mounting points on the side of the case. So that means it's not just being held directly through the glass. So this means there's also some metal strips going down the sides of this side panel. That's also where the thumb screws attach. And then towards the front as well, there's some little tabs that stick out there to catch on the front edge of the case. Internally, we have what is, I think, a pretty standard ATX layout for recent build designs. Basement down at the bottom that does have some perforation, some ventilation through it. Ventilation all throughout is this sort of triangle pattern. It's on the rear PCI Express brackets. They've kept it the same pattern throughout, so that's good for design purposes. And it does allow a lot of airflow through. So both from a functional standpoint, as well as I'd say from an aesthetic standpoint, I think that was a good choice, particularly for the airflow version here. This comes with 2 fans pre-installed, 1 intake at the front and 1 exhaust in the back. So again, if you're buying this just as the $80 version, just to get yourself up and running, you will have airflow in the case. And then of course you have the option to add more fans in the future if you so desire, or if you feel it's needed based on the hardware that you install. Vertical mount here, potentially for a GPU, although that's not pitched as sort of one of the selling points for this case. It does have dust filtration down here at the bottom for the power supply intake. Again, that big dust filter up on top, held on by some magnets with a little tab at the corner. And then I was noticing for cable management, there are no rubber grommets anywhere inside here. There are some pass-throughs up at the top edge here for like CPU supplemental power and that sort of thing. And then I'm gonna say this reminds me a little bit of NZXT's implementation with their bar that they have going down here where you pass the cables through, and it's a little bit of an accent piece. This isn't exactly the same design, but it's just, again, reminding me of that a little bit. But the back panel here just sort of angles out and over a little bit and then has a gap all along this side. So that's where you'd pass the cables out. So I think that allows them to probably save a little bit on the cost of building the case, but also still provides what looks like it will be a pretty clean pass-through area for all the cables. So we'll see if it's a challenge getting like a bulky 24 pin through there. Just getting this case undressed to the rest of the way so we can look at the internals, and this front panel kind of threw me for a loop. It's not the type that you can just grab from the bottom and yank off. This metal piece, and it is metal, and it just pops out, and it just has, again, more of those little, what are pretty sturdy nubs. I actually like this because the nubs themselves are sturdy. As for the brackets they snap into, I have had these break in the past, but these seem like they're holding up pretty well, even though I completely tried to remove the front panel wrong the first time and some of those popped out. Those are also replaceable too, so I imagine Corsair could send you replacements if you did manage to break them. But that reveals this dust filter for the front panel, which goes across the entire thing. Pretty fine mesh on there, but it does look like it would allow a decent amount of airflow through. And then that allows you access to all these mounting points for your fans in the front. And these do have a bit of a vertical adjustment, so depending on the fan and or radiator configuration that you're going with, you can get that mounted properly. It does have space in the front for 3 120s or 3 140s. While I'm at the top up here can do a 2 fan setup, so you can do a 240 or 280 millimeter radiator. I'm gonna be mounting the 280 rad up there for our all-in-one liquid cooler. And then finally we can look at the back panel here where we have yet again something that I think I've seen a little bit of before, but I don't mind it being there. I just want to point out that it's not the first time I've seen it, but they've got a cable routing channel here. And I think one of the unique things that they've done is it's actually removable. It's held on with standard Phillips head screws. So it looks like you could remove that if you just needed a little bit more space to work with, or if the channeling wasn't working out for your setup. But you've got some nice Corsair Velcro straps going down the whole thing, and that's where, you know, hopefully most of your cables are going to go through. You also have a couple 2.5-inch drive mounts back here. And again, another thing that I've seen before, but I totally appreciate because I like having that flexibility. If you have an ugly SSD, you can mount it right back here. If you have a pretty SSD, you can move that up to there, and it's held in, and there's 2 locations to put that, one here and one here. Beyond that, we got our power supply basement down there, and then there is a little drive cage there for a couple 3.5-inch drive mounts if you are still rocking mechanical drives. So it's good to have a first look and sort of an assessment of the case that we're building in. I have a better idea of how the layout's gonna go in here now, and in particular, where I'm gonna be mounting all of those fans, because I have plenty of fans to install with RGB cabling. But now it's time to get the core components put together, motherboard, CPU, and all that, and then we can start installing in our case. All right, so I think our motherboard is pretty much set up. Not completely, but at this point, memory is installed, CPU is installed, SSD is installed. By the way, if you're having any difficulty getting this SSD in the lower slot here, it needs to be pushed in all the way in order to drop down onto that little notch. It was a little janky getting that back on there, so I wanted to point that out. Now at this point, I would want to drop the motherboard in, and most systems you'd want to put an IO shield in there first, but this motherboard has a fixed IO shield, so that is nice. I would also want to be thinking about the mounting solution for the CPU cooler. The Corsair unit actually uses these brackets that come pre-installed with AM4 mounts, which honestly isn't my favorite mounting method because you have to take these little hooks and kind of push them down and hook them over that, but that's okay. I put these brackets back in since they weren't installed, and that does mean now that the motherboard is good to go and be installed into the case. And fortunately, the case has all of its standoffs pre-mounted in its proper locations, and Corsair is still putting the little plug one in the center, so once you get the motherboard right, that should sort of hold it in place while you mount the rest of the screws. Now, since I'm trying to plan ahead here, I would also want to consider where my RGB stuff is going to go and how I'm going to hook that up. Corsair's RGB fans, for better or for worse, have two plugs coming off of them. One is just your regular plug to plug in so the fan works, so if you want to skip the RGB, you can do that, and in a pinch I have done that, and I appreciate that it's just a standard plug there. However, the other plug is a proprietary plug that has to plug directly into an RGB control unit, either one of these little RGB hub units that ships with the fan packs, or the Capellix comes with this a little bit fancier one. This has plug-in spots not just for the RGB, but also for the fans on the other side. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got 6 RGB connection inputs on this side, and I'm going to use that for all of my fans. I'm going to put 3 fans in the front, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put the 2 fans that come with the Capellix cooler in the top, and then just one 120 RGB exhaust in the back. So that's 6 fans total, and that means I should be able to get away with just one of these hubs. And I could even use this smaller one if I was really short on space, because that would just control the RGB. It does need a SATA power plug and a USB connection to the motherboard in order for the Corsair software to recognize it and control it. But I think I'll probably use this unit because this one also has those fan connector inputs, but I'm only going to use this for fans that are not connected to the radiator. So the 4 fans not on the rad, I'll plug in through this, and all the RGB will go in through that. And then the 2 fans for the radiator, I'm going to connect up to the CPU fan headers on the motherboard. That way those can be controlled directly by the motherboard with the speed based on the CPU temperature. Hardware is all unboxed and laid out here on the table, so I'm going to start putting things in the case now. Things are proceeding pretty smoothly with this build. I decided to get like fans installed first and get that all lined up, and got the motherboard installed and like extra stuff like the power supply down there, so I could get all the cables plugged in before I started working with this stuff out in front, specifically the all-in-one liquid cooler. I had our Corsair Dominator Platinum memory all installed there, looking quite nice. And I need to point out here once again, this is not the memory that I picked out specifically. Corsair just sent this over, so I accept no responsibility for this being incompatible with the cooler, but it's just too tall. And although I've used Dominator Platinum memory before, and I really like kind of the direction they've gone with it when it comes to the style and this, and from the demos I've seen, like the LEDs look pretty cool and stuff as well. But as you can see in here, just too tall. So I went and took a stick of G-Skill and dropped that in instead. As you can see, it's significantly shorter, and that just barely has enough clearance. In fact, the cooler actually kind of rides right on top of the top edge there, but it is enough for me to get it installed. And let it be known in this build that my loyalty is to RGB and not to Corsair. So I'm gonna drop in a G-Skill kit right there so we can maintain the RGB on the memory, and then we can continue. I'm happy to say with swapping that memory kit in, I was able to get the cooler installed, so there is enough clearance if you go with slightly shorter RAM and you don't necessarily need to abandon the RGB. But I do want to point out here that my memory is actually tucked under the radiator right there at the end, so I needed to install the memory first before the radiator. And that means when I get to testing this setup, because I already mentioned I wanted to use slightly faster RAM, this is 3200 speed memory in there, I'm going to need to at least loosen this radiator to swap the memory out. So that is a huge inconvenience purely for the sake of of max RGB. So I hope you RGB fans appreciate the extra lengths I'm going to in this video. All right, so now we're getting the block installed, and I removed the brackets on the side for Intel, and I installed the AMD ones. And this is what I was saying I'm not a big fan of. You have these two hooks on the bottom of either side, and you sort of loosely attach the screws on there. Then you need to align that up in here, and then you need to sort of press it down over the catches on the top side and the bottom side of this bracket mount. This mounting solution has been around since like AM3 days and before. I just find getting enough pressure to hook those around while not feeling like you're crushing the CPU or putting weird pressure on it at an awkward angle is sort of difficult to do. Oh, and do all this while you're like being very careful not to smudge up or mess up the pre-applied thermal paste on the bottom. Ah. No. No. Oh, come on. It was in, and that just slipped off the... I had it installed, I was tightening it down, and then the top one just slipped off. Corsair, there's lots more people using AMD these days, and you really need to figure out a better solution for this. You've got a really nice backplate to use. Ditch these stupid plastic pieces and figure out something better for this. I've set the case on its side for the installation, and I'm also running out of time. That sucks when you're trying to do something like this, but I'm gonna mount it like that, and I'll be right back. All right, so I kind of got it set in place. I don't have a camera set up to record at this angle, I'm sorry guys right now, but here's the problem. Get it hooked over the end. Super easy task to start with. Okay. Guess what happens when you start turning that screw? This just twists off the end. It's really stupid. Okay, I'm done complaining about this, but I really, really don't like this mounting method for this cooler. Okay, it's installed. So I did hit my time limit and I had to step away, but I am back, and I wanted to give a reassessment of this AIO now that I've had a few moments away. Going with an all-in-one cooler, like a liquid cooler for your CPU, is always going to add a bit of complexity to the installation process. And although I did get frustrated with the mounting for the AM4 socket on this one, it is functional. You just have to finagle it a little bit. I wanted to point out that if you have your heart set on like some taller memory sticks, something akin to the Dominator Platinums that I started off with, you can still accommodate that in this build. Just keep in mind you have a 240mm radiator mount here that's shifted a little bit more to the right, so that will give you like that much more clearance for your memory, which should accommodate most kits. Personally, I would prefer lower profile memory that makes that clearance and a bigger radiator, like a 280mm radiator over a 240. But I am happy to say that this build is nearing completion. With everything installed there, we just have a couple more things. The GPU, of course, I'm gonna save that for last. In the meantime, we need to wire up all of our fans on the front, the top, and the back, and all of those have both power plugs as well as RGB plugs. And that work is all gonna take place right here in the system's shady underbelly, looking, you know, honestly, it's not looking all that bad. So far, I did wire up the 24 pin right here, and I want to point out that that cover there in the front that things tuck behind, it does look like it's removable. There's tabs here that hold it in place, so you could pop that off for easier cable management or if it was just getting in your way. So I appreciate that as well. Modularity in a case is always nice. But note that there's also a decent amount of space back here. So even with like this little ridge here that I had to pass the 24 pin over, I was able to do a zip tie right here to sort of hold it in place and present the nicest part of the cable out there where it's visible, and there's still plenty of clearance to get the side panel back on. So now I need to install this guy, and I've realized that if you have the Capellix cooler, you actually need to use this one. You can't swap in or just trade out for one of these smaller units here with the RGB control. And that is because there's a proprietary plug on this end, and that's the only plug that will plug in from the pump block combo unit. So we will have to use this. I'm okay at that. You know what would be really nice with these though? Is if they just had 2.5-inch drive mounts on them, or screw holes or something like that. I could totally just pop it on one of those. No luck though, so we'll be going with the adhesive. In retrospect, taking these two plugs from the top two fans and passing them through here so that I can plug them into the two headers that are right there that are now blocked by this radiator in front of them is gonna be a bit of a challenge. Taking advantage of our wire folding skills, put a little kink in the wire there, a little fold, that way I can feed it through here. It's really easy to do with one hand. Then I can use that to kind of align it with the pins. Once it's lined up, I can barely fit my finger in there to push it in. Cool. That was easy. All right, I have everything plugged in, I believe in a functional state. We'll find out in a few minutes when I power everything on, but gosh, when you add a central hub like this and you have wires coming in from the front, from the top, from the back, it does kind of make a mess of things. My experience last year in 2019 when I did the micro ATX build with the Corsair Hydro X water cooling stuff was that once you get everything wired up like this, you can get it functional. There's still plenty of space here. I'm gonna have no issues getting the side panel on and everything, so you could easily just leave your cabling like this, but often it helps to get it all plugged in like this, make sure it's functional, and then come back and take a second pass at it. I'm gonna skip that second pass today just for the sake of time, but everything on this side is looking nice and pretty, so it is nice to know that even if you don't have the best of cable management skills, you should be able to get everything tucked in back behind the motherboard tray and still have a pretty nice looking system up here in the front. These are my PCI Express pass-through cables, which I pass through down there at the bottom. I'm gonna quickly tidy up my workspace and then install our RTX 3080. And there it is, all put together, not powered on yet. These PCI Express power cables here were, if this system was submitted to Pimp My PC for Kyle and I to analyze the aesthetics of, we would probably complain pretty significantly about these PCI Express power cables. They have a daisy chain on the end, so I could have just used one cable to plug in both of these, but it's often better to plug directly in if you have that capability, each plug directly to the power supply. So I think it's really just calling out for some sleeved extensions here that would reduce a lot of the bulk. It would look a lot nicer and it would not block as much of our RGB Zotac gaming logo from the graphics card. And with that, I think the system is all put together. Haven't put on this side panel yet, that's bad luck before you power it on for the first time, but let's power it on for the first time. Ooh. How did I do that and do it the wrong way? That's better. Well, cool. I am very happy with the successful first powering on of this system, and it looks like all the RGBs are functioning properly. Software is not installed yet, so we'll need to do that separately. But one of the things I took a little bit of extra time to do was make sure that as I was plugging in all of the fans, I was plugging into the numbered slots on the little RGB controller from Corsair. And that is because if you do want to get into some fancy RGB control features, having those plugged into the right numbered slots is pretty helpful. You can manipulate it in the software, but I usually just count from the front in the bottom, so I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 in the back. And of course you could easily add more RGB to this system with some LED strips and that kind of thing, but I think it's got plenty going for it for right now with all the fans. The Capellix LEDs on the iCue H115i Elite Capellix cooler do look pretty nice, and since they're able to fit more of those in there, it's got a nice uniform transition as it goes around. There's actually a separate faceplate that you can drop in there as well, but since this is the black version of the case, I think the black actually looks a little bit better than that would. But guys, I'll post links to all these parts down in the video description below, so check that out if you're interested. And I will be following up with some testing of this system. I think I'm going to use it to do some comparative testing of RTX 3080s in a hopefully reasonably built system. That way we can get some sustained temperature numbers and that kind of thing to determine if one of these cards is a standout over the others. For now, we got the Zotac Gaming Trinity RTX 3080 in here. It's definitely slimmer in this direction than the other 3080s that I got a chance to look at, so I think that works out great. And the length is perfectly fine in this system. There's still at least a few inches there at the end, so it could have been even bigger if they had wanted to, but I think it's fine as is. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the thumbs up button on your way out and check the description down below again for links to these parts, as well as a link to my store at paulshardware.net, where you can buy shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other super sweet merchandise to help support my channel. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.